Hi everyone, my guest today is a good friend of mine, Liam Kimberley. We had so much to talk about that I've split this between two episodes, the first of which we discuss his career path from fresh apprentice straight out of school to now the CAD and BIM delivery director at a leading UK consultancy. He's had quite the astounding career already, and I can't wait for you to hear all about it. Well, hi Liam, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm really excited to what we're going to talk about. I think we always end up having a really interesting conversation, so I will see where this one goes. But why don't we start right at the top, and how did you get into civil engineering?
Bit of an accident, really, as I found with quite a few technicians, but my dad was a old school drafts person, and he I kind of left school at 16, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And yeah, he just asked me, I've heard of an apprenticeship opening up. Do you want to see if that's something you'd enjoy? And yeah, I went for it. And almost from day one, I knew it was something I'd love doing.
Was an apprenticeship route a standard way into the industry at the time?
Yeah, I think I was working for a company called Scott Wilson Rail, and the only way they were hiring young people in was through they were informal apprenticeships. It's not kind of quite like it is now, but there were a couple of people ahead of me, so every year they were bringing in young people like myself to join a college course and do on the job working alongside it.
So that was basically turn up to work, do some drafting, go to college part-time during the week, or was it block release? Or
yeah, it was 1 day a week, as with a lot of the apprenticeships now. It's a BTEC national certificate for 2 years, and then a higher national certificate for 2 years in civil engineering. So alongside that, I was working 4 days as a civils technician, as it was called back then.
And what sort of projects were you working on?
Yeah, so it was being a rail company, it was a lot of Crossrail, old Crossrail jobs that were being pulled off the shelves where, they'd been sitting around for 10 years. And so we were picking up very old drawing files and designs and bringing them up to the latest standards as they were then. And then a huge amount of work for Network Rail, East London Line, Rugby, West Coast Roost modernisation, projects like that. So fairly major schemes around London and kind of the north and the east. Which made it very interesting.
Yeah, and had that fully transitioned onto electronic drawings, or were you still on a drawing board?
No, so at that point, the drawings I was picking up, some of them were scanned, old school hand drawings. Some of them were just very early versions of CAD drawings where things like levels or layers, depending on what background you have, were numbers, not names. You couldn't have names on them and that sort of thing. And but at that point, a kind of newer version of MicroStation had come out. It's called MicroStation MX, and we were using that, and that was kind of the foundation of the tools we use today. They look very similar. Still, not a lot has changed since then.
And you said your dad was in that industry, so you would have had an idea of the sort of things that he was doing. But did you have a sense of what you enjoyed doing and how that job was going to fulfill your ambitions for a career, or were you just, there's an opportunity at the time, this feels like a bit of fun, let's go and take it?
Yeah, I think I was just excited to, I got there on the first day and they sat me at a desk with my own computer and my own phone, and I just couldn't believe what was going on. Don't know what I was expecting, whether I was just expecting to be sat on someone's shoulder watching them do their work, but, having my own computer for the first time and all the software on it, and then kind of getting straight into things like Stockley Junction, where we were doing a flyover, big concrete piers and just really learning about all the technical side and starting to understand how concrete worked. My dad was a bit of an RC specialist, and almost immediately I could see why he enjoyed it so much. Just a fascinating thing that changes on every job you work on.
Yeah, and a real puzzle to solve, isn't it? Even with today's modern technology, there's a lot of skill there in actually setting out bars, working out the buildability, building it efficiently, etc., etc., and then actually showing that on a drawing is still an art form as much as a science, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that is what appeals so much to a lot of technicians, is that practical side, that practical thinking, and the importance of it within those drawings. It's not just about, copying a hand sketch onto an electronic format. You're very much involved in part of the design process, and you've really got to think about how someone on site is going to construct the thing and what challenges they might face, so that you can help design them out before those drawings go out.
Yeah. Do you remember, you talk about trying to think about how things are going to be constructed, but I mean, as someone who's just left school, I mean, you may have been involved with a little bit of DIY at home or something like that, but to suddenly be thrown in to go, oh, how are we going to build this structure? How are we going to lay out this reinforcement? How are they going to start with setting out on site? What information do they actually need? That's a tall order to work out. Can you remember what that was like?
Yeah, it was a real shock. It was, I think back then when I started, there was a lot of respect given to technicians and a lot of autonomy for technicians to receive a brief and then get on with it. And as a very junior person coming in, that was quite daunting, but the support I had around me was excellent. I mentioned I had other apprentices, a few years above me, and my line manager at the time was a very experienced structural detailer. And so kind of learning about those things was easy if you were asking questions. And it was very much on you as an apprentice to come and ask the questions. And there were a few times, I'd sit there because I'd already asked 10 questions that day, and it's kind of, oh gosh, I don't want to keep bothering them. I know they're busy, but it was really the only way to cope. But there was still very early on those things like, I had no idea what bridge bearings were. And, remember modeling these bridge bearings thinking, oh, what are these little things? And then a few years later, kind of actually going and seeing it being constructed and seeing these enormous metal bearings going into place, thinking, my goodness, you really don't get that sense of scale when you're drawing on a computer.
No, it sounds crazy when you're literally drawing it and putting the dimensions on it, and you can do everything in your power possible to try and imagine what that looks like. But as you say, until you see it, even well into my career, I still are amazed at how big things look when you actually get it out on site. Yeah. So in terms of the time you spent on your apprenticeship course, so was that through a college, was it, presumably?
Yeah, so it was North Star College in Swindon, and it was, I don't know if Scott Wilson had a specific agreement with them. I'm not really sure how it worked back then.
Yeah, but was the content of that course purely around how to produce the drawings, or were you learning about the engineering as well? Because I mean, the really good draftspeople do have a strong understanding of the engineering, and they're a real resource to go to for sense checking on whether something just feels right, amongst other things.
Yeah. So it was very much civil engineering orientated. So there was the math side for structural mechanics. There was surveying and geology and and those types of subjects, a lot of what you see on courses today. And at the time, like some of the criticism you hear from apprenticeships today, it's, well, how does all of this relate to the role I do as a technician? Because I wasn't sitting around doing calculations. I did a little bit later where I was kind of helping to start check calculations and things, but it was never going to be my job to do that. But as you say, having that basic insight into how the design side works, what the engineers have to think about, helps you communicate better as a technician, I think, because you know what the engineers are going to be thinking about. And as well, it helps you communicate to the engineers the things that you still need from them, you still expect to receive, and how you expect to receive that as a technician to allow you to do your job effectively.
Yeah, I think the other one that comes to mind is having an idea about how the drawing might evolve and how the design might evolve, so that you perhaps don't reproduce work to a really high level of detail that you kind of know is going to change. I mean, there's classic examples, especially when you start as a graduate engineer and you go and give something to an experienced draftsperson and you say, here's a sketch, could you draw that up? And you come back a couple of days later and they've done something and you go, why didn't you do that bit? And he goes, yeah, I kind of know that's going to change. And lo and behold, a week later, it's tweaked because they know there's a few more details to think about. But it's having that understanding of the engineering process as well, even as you say, you're not actually doing it.
Absolutely. And I think that is one of the reasons why I really loved surveying as a subject, because everything starts with how you're going to set something out. And as a technician, you know, you're doing that virtually when you're starting those drawings and models, and knowing how to get things started, where to get them started from, not just so when that translates to a drawing, you can your dimensions and everything all work so people on site can see exactly how they need to set things out. But like you say, for those things that are going to change later on, you know where you've got to put your effort. So those items that are static, they're the ones that are going to really determine how this structure and this drawing is going to end up being laid out. So everything around that can shift and move if you do it the right way without lots of effort, where we were doing it in 2D and that, knowing the knock-on effect to other drawings, you had to keep all of that in mind from the very start.
Yeah, it just occurs to me actually that when you were describing that if you think of drawing production as really telling the story of how they're going to construct it, and you produce your drawings and you set about creating them with that mindset, probably produces the most useful set that can be used on site then, doesn't it?
Exactly. And I think that was always the philosophy that my dad drilled into me, was the way that you build your drawings is as if you're physically building it out on site. You know, the sky hook joke that we all used to get when you see something just floating there and asking the question of, well, how does that stand up? You know, it's always having that in mind of, okay, what comes first? What's the sequence of events? How are they actually going to build this? And if you're doing your drawing with that mindset, it helps you answer a lot of questions for those people coming to read those drawings later, and helps you remove a lot of that ambiguity, because that's a huge part of the technician's job, is making sure the ambiguity of what is shown on those drawings is completely removed before they go anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. So where did your career go next?
So by the end of my apprenticeship, there was a lot being farmed out to other countries for technician work. So RC detailing in particular, because it's one of those parts of the design that's easier to package. We saw a huge amount of that going out to China and India and being done at very low rates, and I was quite concerned I wouldn't end up with a job in a few years' time if things carried on that way.
Yeah.
And so
Familiar story today, but for a different reason with AI, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And these things happen and come around all of the time. And so what I decided to do was take myself out of work and go into full-time education on a degree off my own back. So I went down to Portsmouth University and studied civil engineering as a degree, because I thought, well, I want to stay in engineering. I love the industry. I love the work that I do. And I've built a lot of skill and knowledge, and I don't want to lose that. So I thought the best thing to do was make sure if the job of a CAD technician was to disappear, that I could kind of change my focus and maintain a role in the industry. But fortunately for me, because by the end of my degree, I was very certain that I loved being a technician, and that's what I wanted to do. Because the engineering was incredibly interesting, but as a practically minded person and kind of how I operate and the things that really interest and excite me, being a technician really, it solidified in my mind that that's what I wanted to do. And fortunately, that's where BIM started to kind of emerge in the industry. So that was around 2011, where BIM really started getting talked about seriously by the government and by people around the industry. And again, my dad said to me, "Oh, you want to watch this BIM thing? It's going to be something important." And so I just started to read up on what it meant and how it was going to change things and what the intention was. And so after doing a bit of contracting around the industry, I found Tony G, and very quickly started helping Tony G with their implementation of BIM.
So I don't think a lot of people realise where BIM has come from. I mean, should we set the record straight on what actually is BIM? Let's start with that one.
Yeah. So BIM is quite a big and broad umbrella for probably several different things, but really the way to look at BIM, I think, is around information management. If you take away all the shiny modeling and graphics side of what BIM is, at its core, it's about managing engineering information better. Again, it helps with that process of setting out what is going to be needed for any given asset during the operation phase, right from the very beginning, right from conception of that project. And so by the time you get to design, what we have at our disposal are all of these incredible tools, like CAD tools, that act as a database to hold that information. So the BIM part of all of this is that information, how it's stored, how it's made accessible to the right people at the right times. So it's very process driven, and very defined, very standardized. And that's kind of the idea behind BIM.
So do you know where it originally came from? You talk about it was right the way up to government level discussing implementing it. I mean, it clearly needed an agreement across the industry to take this approach. But where did that all start? Do you know?
So I don't know exactly where it came from. I can't remember the name of the person who coined the term BIM, but it was very early. If it wasn't in the 80s, it was not long after that. The term BIM was coined a lot earlier than it was actually being used around the industry. But the point of it is, although BIM became a phrase in its own right. Information management was always happening. So there were kind of flagship projects like Crossrail and T5 in particular that used these concepts. They helped define and build these concepts because they knew in order to get their jobs done effectively, they were going to have to think about how their information was being structured and managed throughout the life cycle of the project. And so I think it was around 2007 when Autodesk wrote a white paper on BIM, kind of describing what it was intended to do. And that was kind of where some of the understanding around BIM started to get confused with technology in CAD rather than being focused on information management.
And you think that was a consequence of that paper, or because it came through Autodesk, which is everybody associates with CAD, basically, don't we?
Yes, the white paper was great. It was even reading it today. There was nothing wrong with what was in there or what was written. It was simply that it was coming from a software vendor. And then the use of the term BIM to sell software after that, from kind of 2012 onwards, you really started to see software vendors using the term BIM to sell you software. So they were trying to sell BIM software, which very quickly changed a few years later when people realized how damaging that was.
Yeah. I think we went through a phase not that long ago where BIM was kind of banded as everything is effectively BIM because everything is building information that needs to be managed. And so actually, I suppose in some ways the engineering aspect of that comes under that term, which perhaps it does in terms of the management and control of the output of the engineering design and maybe the calculations and specifications, etc. But it feels like that confused matters a little bit because it then became a term that basically was not far off civil engineering.
Yeah, and I think that's the trouble. Again, it's you're trying to put a wrapper around something that's always been there. And actually, what happened with some of the BIM standards and the terminology that came out with them is it effectively renamed things that were already happening. So design management plans and that type of information that was already being created was effectively renamed within the BIM standards, things like TIDPs and there's a bit more information in a task information delivery plan than you might have had in an early design management plan, but ultimately they're the same thing for the same purpose. But what you then had was you had the engineers creating their design management plans as they always did, and then the technicians, because BIM was seen as something technicians did, the technicians were then trying to build and manage separate task information delivery plans. And it kind of defeated the object and the purpose of what those tools were trying to achieve, which ultimately is efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. So just stepping back, you talked about you went off and did your civil engineering degree. You then identified that obviously you wanted to work in the technician field of the industry, and that BIM was this thing that was becoming a big part of the industry. You want to be part of it. You then mentioned that there were some flagship projects that had started to make use of it. I suppose most of us at that stage would say, if that's what I want to do, I need to be in on that project so that I understand how it works. You didn't. You said, there's a company over here that's doing some interesting things. Let's see if I can go and become part of that organization and develop their capability in this field. Do you have a sense of what gave you the confidence that you could go and do that? Because that's another massive undertaking to go and do with no real background knowledge of it other than just your confidence that I can learn this as fast as the next person.
It was one of those things where I think through my apprenticeship, I'd learned very early on that it was a really good approach to the way that I used to put it and I think it was one of these kind of positive sayings that you see pop up here and there, but it was do today what others won't, so you can do tomorrow what others can't. And that was very much my philosophy. So as an apprentice, I learnt about the printers. It was nothing really other than the fact that I printed a lot of drawings. I didn't have to learn or know anything about printers, but I saw that the printers got jammed all the time and everybody was always having problems. And I thought, you know what, I'll just pay a bit more attention. I'll read some of the manuals and then I'll get up and help people, because I sat right by the printing area. And so it was just one of those things where I became the person to come to for any problems with the printers. And BIM was a very similar thing in that respect. It was something people didn't understand. It was something a lot of people were avoiding because it was changing things, and change is not something we do particularly well in infrastructure, civil engineering, in terms of kind of fundamentally changing how we do something. And so it was something I had an interest in. There was a technology aspect that really appealed to me as well. And then with that philosophy alongside it, it was just kind of, well, yeah, I'll keep pushing and learning. I'll just try and keep ahead of where most people are, and that will then just help give me the confidence to be able to answer questions
and give it a go.
that people have. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was very much trial and error, very much.
And do you think that's something that you see in yourself from growing up, where you were always interested in technology and understanding how things worked and going and playing, or is it more that you got yourself a job and suddenly had a bit of spare income and all these things around you that you could go and have a go at?
No, my mum still tells me stories today of how upset she was on Christmas Day after she bought all of these lovely new toys for me, and the first thing I did was find a screwdriver and take them all to pieces and break them to bits to try to figure out how they worked, and then never being able to get them back together. It was something that from a very young age, I always had an interest in trying to understand how things work. I spent a lot of time with my dad, who was someone who did a lot of DIY and handiwork, and he always gave things a go. And then kind of later on, I remember, I think it was from one of our cousins, gave us their old Windows 3.1 PC. And that thing, I don't think I ever had a clean hard drive. It was constantly full of viruses from mouse pointers that I'd been downloading, or, so always trying to learn and understand, and fell in love with computers as soon as I got my hands on them.
Yeah. And I mean, I've done a couple of careers fairs and things like that, and I say to people, they're often focusing on what subject should I do for GCSEs and A levels, and then how do I then decide what I want to do next, whether it's the apprenticeship route or your degree route or whatever. And I say to them that just take a little bit of a step back. You've got these core subjects, which are kind of the obvious ones that you need if you want to be in a technical field, particularly engineering and certainly civil engineering. But actually think about what else you can do to add to your knowledge and the skill set that you can offer to a university or an apprenticeship course, and then eventually an employer. Go and get yourself a Raspberry Pi and go and do some programming with it. Go and get it to do some stuff that you just find interesting, and play with it, and just be enthusiastic about it. Don't worry about whether you need to do a particular extra module of this maths or chemistry or whatever it is you want to do. Go and have a play, take things apart, get involved with doing some DIY at home, and that is what's probably going to really put you in a good stead for doing something special in your career.
Absolutely. And it's something I learned about a few years ago now, when I was moving into leadership positions, was the idea of a growth mindset, and it resonated quite well with me, because I was always interested in there's something happening over here. Okay, it doesn't specifically relate to everything I do day to day, but it's interesting and I've got a view on it. So I'll just pop over there and see if someone wants a chat and see where that goes, get involved if I can help, and if I can help them move things forward, because everybody's busy and nobody ever turns a helping hand down. And I think that's such an important thing to be able to do, is look outside of what your core focus is to other areas that provide you with complementary skills or help you develop skills in a very different way. So if you're very theoretically driven, having that practical involvement can be a really enjoyable experience, as well as teaching you a lot. And, Raspberry Pis and Arduinos was something I fell in love with as well when I first found out about them, and tinkering with those and a bit of web design and all of those little things. And today, in the job that I do, building dashboards and a bit of programming here to make things more effective, all of that contributed to my ability to apply those skills to my job.
Yeah. And I think you're probably too humble to say this, but you've really rocketed to a pretty senior position at Tony G pretty quickly. Do you feel like there's been a step change in your role, and or is it just been a linear process? And I suppose the other part of that question is, I know the first part of the answer, which is that role didn't really exist when you started it, but was that something that you solely created yourself and put forward as a potential business plan, or how else did that come about?
Yeah, so in the early days, there was a BIM manager role, kind of undefined, but provided by the business, as we know we need a BIM manager, but we don't really know what we need them to do. And so my first job as BIM manager was to define what it was I was going to be doing. And then all the way through the career from that point onwards, it was good then because the team was growing, the people that I had helping me and helping us really implement BIM properly for Tony G. All together, we were working on what BIM really meant to our industry as much as to our business, and then helping us define what we needed to do, what we needed to be doing to help our business and help our industry in those roles. And so all the way through, we'd been defining and redefining our roles to make sure they matched what those requirements were. And we didn't always get it right, but when you're in a role that is changing so quickly, and your understanding of the role is developing so quickly, it's only natural that you're going to get things wrong and things are going to change. But the kind of growth in terms of my development and progression through the business always felt very natural. It wasn't something I was necessarily pushing to do, or really looking at what the next thing I had to be doing to move up in my career. I think it's where you're focused on the work and you're focused on what's important and you're learning and growing all of the time. Those things happen as a byproduct of that.
Liam and I had so much to talk about that I've decided to cut this episode here, but fear not, I will be releasing the next part very shortly. As you can hopefully tell, Liam is really passionate about his job, and the role that he can play in helping the industry meet the ever-changing needs of modern society. I think it's fair to say that he's indeed playing a fairly significant role in doing just that, but you've only heard the half of it. Next time, we explore Liam's thoughts on how the industry has somewhat fallen behind in supporting technicians develop the skills that we need them to have and will need them to have in the future. We go on to talk about the work that Liam's been doing with the Institution of Civil Engineers to try and address that shortfall, and his take on the fantastic opportunities that are available to technicians in this industry. I have to say that by the end of this episode, I felt myself even tempted to consider a career change. His enthusiasm is absolutely inspiring. If you're enjoying the podcast, please do like, subscribe and share. It helps me to build my listener base, which in turn helps me to bring more great guests on and more great content. Thank you very much.